The executive floor of Morrison Industries buzzed with controlled urgency as Mark Thompson pushed his cleaning cart through the gleaming corridors at 6 in the morning. At 42, his weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency around mahogany conference tables and leather chairs that cost more than most people earned in a month. The cleaning uniform hung comfortably on his lean frame, a symbol of honest work that he wore without shame despite the assumptions it invited from those who mistook service for servility. For 2 years, he had navigated these hallways with quiet dignity, understanding that his invisible presence allowed him to observe the complex dynamics of corporate power in ways that participants rarely recognized. The early morning shift suited him perfectly, providing stable income while allowing him to be present for his daughter Emma's school schedule. At 8 years old, she represented everything meaningful in his life, the reason he approached each day with purpose despite the loneliness that had settled over their small apartment since her mother's death 3 years earlier. Cancer had taken Sarah suddenly, leaving Mark to rebuild their lives around the simple truth that love and consistency mattered more than wealth or status. He had learned to braid Emma's hair through online tutorials, master the art of packed lunches that balanced nutrition with appeal, and create bedtime routines that provided security in an uncertain world. Their evening walks through the neighborhood park had become sacred time, where they discussed everything from homework struggles to dreams about the future, conversations that reminded him daily why every sacrifice was worthwhile. Victoria Morrison commanded attention through every gesture and word, her presence filling conference rooms with the kind of authority that came from inheriting both wealth and responsibility at an early age. At 35, she had transformed Morrison Industries from a family business into a multinational corporation, earning respect through strategic brilliance and ruthless efficiency that left little room for the personal connections that had once defined her life. The corner office with its panoramic city view served as both sanctuary and prison, a space where she made decisions affecting thousands of employees while struggling to maintain meaningful relationships with the few people who mattered most. Her greatest challenge walked these same halls each morning, though their interactions had become increasingly strained as professional demands consumed more of her attention. Madison Morrison, 7 years old, moved through the corporate environment with the entitled confidence of someone who had never been told that the world didn't revolve around her needs and desires. The childcare center on the building's 15th floor provided supervision during Victoria's long working hours, but the arrangement felt more like institutional necessity than family connection. Nannies, tutors, and caregivers rotated through their lives with professional competence but emotional distance, creating a childhood shaped by luxury and expertise rather than the consistent presence that might have fostered genuine security. Madison's behavior reflected the confusion of a child who possessed unlimited material resources but struggled to understand why tantrums and demands no longer produced the immediate attention they once had from her increasingly absent mother. The pattern that would change everything began on a Tuesday morning when Mark arrived to find Madison sitting alone in the hallway outside the childcare center, her school uniform rumpled and tears streaming down her face. The staff member who should have been supervising her arrival was nowhere in sight, leaving a 7-year-old to navigate the complex emotions of another disrupted routine without adult guidance. Mark's instinct was to continue with his cleaning duties, understanding that his role didn't extend to childcare responsibilities that fell outside his job description. Yet something about the child's defeated posture reminded him of Emma during the difficult months after Sarah's death, when small disappointments felt overwhelming because they layered onto deeper losses that couldn't be easily explained or fixed. He approached slowly, setting his cart aside and crouching to Madison's eye level with the gentle patience he had learned through years of comforting his own daughter through various crises. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice carrying the warmth that came naturally when addressing children in distress. "Looks like you're having a rough morning. Do you want to tell me what's wrong?" Madison's initial response combined suspicion with desperation, the wariness of a child who had learned that adult attention often came with conditions or expectations that she couldn't consistently meet. "Nobody's here yet, and Mom's already in meetings, and I don't know where I'm supposed to go." Her voice held the tremor of someone trying to maintain control while feeling fundamentally unsafe in her environment. Mark recognized the complicated emotions that came with being dependent on adults whose priorities extended beyond immediate childcare needs. "That sounds really frustrating," he acknowledged, avoiding the impulse to offer quick solutions that might not address the underlying feelings. "It's hard when the people who are supposed to help you aren't where you expect them to be. Would it help if we figured out what to do next together?" The simple validation seemed to surprise Madison, who was accustomed to adults either dismissing her concerns as trivial or rushing to fix problems without acknowledging their emotional impact. Mark's willingness to sit with her discomfort rather than immediately resolving it created space for the kind of conversation that rarely occurred in her overscheduled life. As they talked, he learned that the night supervisor had called in sick, leaving the morning staff to arrive later than usual without anyone communicating the change to families who depended on consistent schedules. The systemic breakdown that had created Madison's distress was real and valid, not the result of childish overreaction or inappropriate neediness. "You know what?" Mark said after listening to her full explanation. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes with communication, and kids end up dealing with the consequences. That's not fair, and it makes sense that you'd feel upset about it." His acknowledgement of the injustice rather than her reaction to it seemed to shift something in Madison's demeanor, creating the foundation for problem-solving that felt collaborative rather than imposed. Together, they walked to the security desk where Mark explained the situation and helped Madison contact her mother's assistant to arrange temporary supervision until the regular staff arrived. Throughout the process, he treated the 7-year-old as a capable participant rather than a problem to be managed, asking for her input on solutions and validating her concerns about disrupted routines. The interaction lasted less than 30 minutes, but it established a pattern of mutual respect that would prove significant in the weeks that followed. Victoria discovered the incident through her assistant's report, learning that building maintenance had assisted her daughter when childcare supervision failed. The information registered as both relief and mild irritation, gratitude that Madison had been helped tempered by frustration that such assistance had been necessary due to institutional failures. Her busy schedule prevented immediate follow-up, though she made a mental note to review protocols that had allowed a 7-year-old to be left unsupervised in corporate hallways. The demanding pace of merger negotiations and quarterly reviews pushed the incident to the background of her consciousness, filed away as a minor crisis successfully resolved through available resources. Mark's second encounter with Madison occurred a week later when he found her having what appeared to be a complete meltdown in the executive break room during his afternoon cleaning rounds. The child sat on the floor, surrounded by scattered papers and overturned furniture, her face red with anger and frustration, while she shouted demands that no one was present to acknowledge or address. The scene would have prompted most adults to summon appropriate authorities and retreat to avoid involvement in what was clearly a complex behavioral situation requiring specialized intervention. Instead, Mark quietly set his supplies aside and sat on the floor several feet away from Madison, neither approaching close enough to feel threatening, nor leaving her to struggle alone with emotions that seemed too large for her small frame. He didn't immediately speak or try to calm her, instead simply maintaining a peaceful presence that acknowledged her distress without judgment or attempts at control. The unexpected response seemed to confuse Madison, whose tantrums typically produced either anxious appeasement or firm discipline from the adults in her life. Mark's willingness to simply witness her emotional storm without trying to stop it or fix it created space for the feelings to run their natural course rather than escalating in response to adult interference. After several minutes, her shouting subsided into exhausted sobbing, the kind of tears that come when anger gives way to the sadness underneath. "That looked like really big feelings," Mark observed gently when she seemed ready for interaction. "Sometimes when everything feels wrong, it helps to let it all out like that." His matter-of-fact acceptance of her emotional expression avoided both shame and praise, treating her outburst as normal human experience rather than behavioral problem or manipulative performance. Madison's response revealed the confusion of a child unaccustomed to adults who didn't immediately launch into lectures about appropriate behavior or consequences for emotional displays. "Everyone thinks I'm bad," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of internalized criticism that had begun to shape her self-concept. "I try to be good, but everything always goes wrong, and then people get mad at me." The statement revealed layers of pain that went far beyond the immediate trigger for her breakdown, suggesting a pattern of interactions that had taught her to view herself as fundamentally problematic, rather than simply struggling with difficult emotions. Mark's heart ached with recognition of the burden this child carried, the impossible standard of perfect behavior that ignored her developmental needs and emotional reality. "You know what I think," he said, keeping his voice gentle but confident. "I think you're a kid who has big feelings about things that matter to you. That's not bad, that's human. Sometimes the way we show those feelings gets us in trouble, but the feelings themselves are always okay." The radical acceptance of her emotional experience seemed to surprise Madison. who had learned to associate her strongest feelings with disapproval and consequences. Mark continued, "When my daughter Emma gets upset, sometimes she needs to cry or be angry before she can figure out what she really needs. It doesn't make her bad, it makes her honest about what she's feeling inside." The comparison to another child who was allowed to have difficult emotions without judgment offered Madison a different framework for understanding her own experiences. Over the following weeks, Mark's path began intersecting with Madison's more frequently, though always in the context of his regular cleaning duties, rather than seeking out interaction with the CEO's daughter. He would encounter her in various states of distress, frustration, or loneliness, each time responding with the same patient presence that avoided both dismissal and over-involvement. When she struggled with homework in the childcare center, he might pause to acknowledge her effort rather than focusing on mistakes. When she complained about unfairness in her structured activities, he would listen to her perspective without immediately correcting or minimizing her concerns. The consistency of his respectful attention began creating changes in Madison's behavior that surprised the staff members who interacted with her daily. The tantrums that had become routine started occurring less frequently, replaced by more direct communication about her needs and feelings. Her interactions with other children showed increased patience and empathy, skills that seemed to develop through experiencing those qualities from an adult who expected nothing from her except honesty about her emotional experience. The academic struggles that had frustrated her tutors began improving as she gained confidence in her ability to learn through mistakes rather than demanding perfection from herself. Victoria first became aware of these changes through reports from the childcare staff, who mentioned that Madison seemed calmer and more cooperative in recent weeks. The improvement was noted with relief rather than curiosity about its source, since successful management of her daughter's behavioral challenges meant fewer disruptions to Victoria's demanding work schedule. When pressed for details about what might have contributed to the positive changes, staff members mentioned that Madison had formed some kind of friendship with the morning cleaning person, though they couldn't provide specifics about the nature of their interactions. The information registered as mildly concerning to Victoria, who had learned to be cautious about Madison's relationships with adults whose backgrounds hadn't been thoroughly investigated. Her protective instincts, heightened by the responsibilities of raising a child in the public eye, made her wary of connections that fell outside established supervision and professional oversight. The decision to investigate further was prompted by her assistant's casual mention that Madison had been seen having animated conversations with building maintenance staff during her supervised activities. Victoria's first direct observation of Mark and Madison together occurred on a Friday afternoon when she left an early meeting to find them sitting on the floor of the reception area, engaged in what appeared to be an art project using supplies from his cleaning cart. Madison was carefully arranging cleaning cloths into patterns while Mark offered gentle suggestions about color coordination and design balance. The scene struck Victoria as simultaneously charming and inappropriate, a boundary crossing that violated the professional distance she expected to be maintained between her family and service employees. "Madison," she called, her voice carrying the authority that brought immediate attention from both child and janitor. "What are you doing down there?" Her daughter's face lit up with genuine excitement as she pointed to her creation. "Mark is teaching me about patterns and symmetry. Look, if you fold this cloth in half, both sides match exactly, but if you use different colors, you can make it look like a kaleidoscope." The enthusiasm in Madison's voice was unmistakable, reflecting engagement with learning that Victoria rarely witnessed during structured educational activities. Mark stood respectfully as Victoria approached, his expression conveying professional awareness of potential impropriety without defensiveness about his intentions. "Ms. Morrison, Madison was waiting for her afternoon tutor when she noticed the way cleaning supplies were organized in my cart. We were just exploring some basic geometric concepts through the materials at hand." His explanation was both accurate and diplomatic, acknowledging the unconventional nature of their activity while emphasizing its educational value. Victoria studied the interaction with the analytical mind that had made her successful in business, noting Madison's relaxed posture and animated engagement alongside the janitor's respectful demeanor and clear commitment to appropriate boundaries. "Madison, please gather your things. Your tutor will be here shortly." Her tone was neutral but firm, designed to end the interaction without creating conflict. As they walked toward the elevator, Madison's chatter revealed the depth of her connection with Mark in ways that concerned Victoria more than she wanted to admit. "Mark knows so many interesting things, Mom. He taught me that you can figure out if something is clean by looking at how light reflects off the surface, and he showed me how to make origami flowers from paper towels." The casual intimacy of using his first name combined with detailed knowledge of his teaching methods suggested a relationship that had developed far beyond casual encounters. Victoria's protective instincts activated as she considered the implications of her daughter forming emotional attachments to employees whose personal lives and motivations remained largely unknown. "Madison, it's nice that Mark has been helpful, but you should remember that he has important work to do. We shouldn't take up too much of his time with conversations." Her attempt to create appropriate distance was gentle but clear, designed to establish boundaries without criticizing either party. Madison's response revealed the defensive loyalty that strong connections inspire in children. "But Mom, he doesn't mind talking to me. He says I ask good questions, and that learning happens everywhere, not just in classrooms." The child's passionate defense of their friendship highlighted both its significance to her emotional well-being and the potential complications it created for established family routines and professional relationships. That evening, Victoria found herself researching background check procedures for building service employees, though she couldn't articulate specific concerns beyond general uneasiness about unstructured interactions between her daughter and staff members. The investigation revealed that Mark Thompson had passed standard security screenings, maintained an excellent employment record, and had no history of inappropriate conduct with minors. Yet the absence of red flags didn't address her deeper concern about Madison's tendency to form intense attachments that could become problematic if the relationship changed or ended unexpectedly. The conversation that would define their future interactions occurred the following Monday when Victoria arrived early to find Mark and Madison engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion about emotional regulation strategies. Her daughter was describing a conflict with a classmate, while Mark listened with the kind of focused attention that Victoria realized she rarely provided due to competing demands on her time and energy. "When someone says something mean to you," Mark was explaining, "you have choices about how to respond. You can get angry and say something mean back, but that usually makes the problem bigger. Or you can take a deep breath and think about what you really want to happen next." Victoria watched from the doorway as Madison absorbed this guidance with unusual receptivity, her posture indicating genuine consideration of alternatives to her typical reactive patterns. The scene crystallized her conflicted feelings about a relationship that was clearly beneficial for her daughter, but fell outside the controlled environment she had worked so hard to create around Madison's development. "Mr. Thompson," she said, stepping into the conversation with professional authority, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Her tone was courteous but firm, conveying the expectation of immediate compliance. Mark's response demonstrated the diplomatic skills that had helped him navigate workplace dynamics successfully for years. "Of course, Ms. Morrison. Madison, why don't you practice those breathing exercises we talked about while your mom and I have a quick conversation?" His redirection of the child's attention was both respectful and protective, avoiding the anxiety that adult conflicts could create for young observers. They moved to a quiet corner of the reception area where Victoria could speak directly without Madison overhearing. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your kindness toward my daughter, but I'm concerned about the amount of time you're spending with her. Building maintenance staff aren't trained in child development, and Madison can be challenging to manage." Her words carried the diplomatic language of corporate communication, expressing concern without direct accusation while establishing clear boundaries. Mark's response reflected both understanding of her position and gentle advocacy for Madison's perspective. "Ms. Morrison, I understand your concerns about appropriate boundaries. I want you to know that my interactions with Madison have always occurred in public spaces, during my regular work duties. She's a bright, curious child who seems to benefit from having someone listen to her thoughts without judgment or pressure to perform." Victoria felt the subtle challenge in his words, the implication that Madison's current support systems might not be meeting all of her emotional needs. "Mr. Thompson, you're not qualified to assess my daughter's emotional needs or the adequacy of her care. I'm asking you to limit your interactions with her to what's absolutely necessary for your job functions." Her tone sharpened slightly as she asserted parental authority and professional hierarchy. The conversation continued with increasing tension, as both adults tried to protect their respective interests while avoiding open conflict. Victoria's primary concern centered on maintaining control over Madison's environment and relationships, while Mark worried about withdrawing support from a child who seemed to genuinely benefit from their connection. The underlying class dynamics added complexity to their discussion, with assumptions about education, expertise, and authority creating barriers to finding common ground. "With respect, Ms. Morrison," Mark finally said, his voice remaining calm despite the obvious stakes. Madison is a wonderful little girl who's trying to figure out how to navigate some complicated emotions. Sometimes kids need different kinds of support from different people. I'm not trying to replace anyone or overstep boundaries, but if she finds our conversations helpful, maybe that's worth considering. Victoria's response revealed both her protective instincts and her discomfort with having parenting decisions questioned by someone she considered unqualified to offer such perspectives. Mr. Thompson, you're a maintenance worker. You clean floors and empty trash cans. The idea that you're qualified to provide emotional support or guidance to my daughter is frankly presumptuous. I need you to respect professional boundaries and focus on your actual job responsibilities. The dismissal was sharp and final, designed to end discussion rather than continue negotiating terms of engagement. Mark felt the familiar sting of being reduced to his job title, his worth as a human being measured solely by his economic function rather than his character or capabilities. You're right that I clean floors and empty trash, he acknowledged quietly. But I'm also a father who's helped my own daughter work through difficult emotions and challenging situations. Those experiences don't become irrelevant because of what I do for work. His response carried dignity without defensiveness, acknowledging her authority while maintaining his own self-respect. The conversation ended with Victoria's clear directive that Mark limit his interactions with Madison to what was strictly necessary for building maintenance, a boundary that she expected would be respected without further discussion. Mark agreed to comply with her wishes, understanding that his employment depended on maintaining positive relationships with executives whose concerns, however misguided, carried ultimate authority in workplace decisions. Yet, as they returned to collect Madison, both adults recognized that the relationship between janitor and child had already created changes that couldn't be easily reversed through administrative directives. The following weeks tested Mark's commitment to respecting Victoria's boundaries while maintaining the emotional connection that had become important to both him and Madison. He continued his cleaning duties with professional efficiency, acknowledging Madison politely when their paths crossed, but avoiding the extended conversations that had characterized their previous interactions. The change was immediately apparent to Madison, whose confusion about the sudden distance created new behavioral challenges that rippled through her carefully structured environment. Her questions about why Mark no longer had time to talk revealed the depth of loss she experienced when meaningful relationships were severed without explanation or opportunity for closure. The regression in Madison's behavior prompted emergency consultations with child psychologists and behavioral specialists, professionals who suggested various interventions without identifying the specific trigger that had precipitated the changes. Victoria found herself managing escalating tantrums, academic struggles, and social conflicts that seemed to emerge from nowhere, creating stress that affected both family dynamics and work performance. The irony that addressing one concern had created multiple larger problems wasn't lost on her, though pride prevented acknowledgement that her intervention might have been counterproductive. Mark watched Madison's struggles with increasing concern, torn between respecting professional boundaries and responding to a child's obvious distress. When he encountered her crying alone in the stairwell after what appeared to be another difficult interaction with authority figures, his paternal instincts overwhelmed his commitment to maintaining distance. "Hey there," he said gently, sitting on the step beside her while maintaining appropriate physical boundaries. "Looks like you're having another tough day." Madison's response revealed the depth of her confusion and hurt about their changed relationship. "You don't like me anymore?" she said through tears. "I must have done something wrong, but nobody will tell me what it was. Everyone just acts different now, and I don't understand why." Her pain was raw and honest, the kind of emotional vulnerability that demanded authentic response rather than diplomatic deflection. Mark struggled with how to address her concerns while respecting the boundaries Victoria had established. "Madison, I want you to know that you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have to follow rules about how they interact with people, even when those rules feel confusing or unfair." His explanation was truthful, while remaining age-appropriate, avoiding criticism of her mother while validating her emotional experience. The conversation that followed helped Madison understand that adult relationships often involve complexities beyond personal preference or affection, though this knowledge did little to ease the loss she felt about their reduced connection. Mark encouraged her to focus on the coping strategies they had discussed and reminded her that learning to manage difficult emotions was a skill that would serve her throughout life, regardless of which adults were available to provide support. When Victoria discovered this interaction through security footage that captured their conversation in the stairwell, Her reaction combined fury with reluctant recognition that Mark's influence on Madison remained significant, despite her attempts to limit their contact. The caring attention he showed her daughter contrasted sharply with the professional distance she had demanded, highlighting the gap between institutional rules and human relationships that didn't conform to organizational boundaries. The confrontation that followed brought their fundamental disagreement into sharp focus, with Victoria asserting parental authority while Mark advocated for Madison's emotional well-being. "Mr. Thompson, I specifically asked you to limit your interactions with my daughter. Finding you counseling her in private directly violates the boundaries we established." Her anger was justified by his apparent disregard for clear directives, though it was complicated by obvious evidence that Madison had benefited from their conversation. Mark's response reflected both respect for her authority and commitment to principles that extended beyond employment considerations. "Ms. Morrison, I understand your frustration, and I respect your right to make decisions about Madison's relationships. But when I see a child in distress, especially one I care about, it's difficult to simply walk away because it's professionally convenient." His honesty was both refreshing and infuriating, acknowledging her concerns while maintaining that some values transcended workplace hierarchies. The argument that followed revealed deeper tensions about class, expertise, and the right to make judgments about children's needs. Victoria's position rested on credentialed authority and institutional power, while Mark's came from experiential knowledge and demonstrated results. Both perspectives had merit, but they seemed fundamentally incompatible in the context of their professional relationship and the specific dynamics surrounding Madison's care. As the discussion continued, Victoria found herself confronting uncomfortable questions about her own availability for Madison's emotional needs, and whether protecting her daughter from potentially beneficial relationships served anyone's actual interests. "The bottom line, Mr. Thompson, is that you're not trained in child psychology or development. Your intentions may be good, but you're not qualified to provide the kind of support Madison needs during challenging periods." Her argument was logical and defensible, based on reasonable concerns about professional boundaries and appropriate expertise. Mark's response challenged the assumptions underlying her position, while acknowledging the complexity of their situation. "You're right that I don't have formal training in child psychology, Ms. Morrison, but I do have experience helping a child work through grief, behavioral challenges, and emotional regulation. Madison seems to respond well to approaches that focus on listening and validation, rather than correction and management." His words carried implicit criticism of more traditional interventions, while avoiding direct judgment of Victoria's parenting choices. The conversation reached an impasse as both adults recognized that their fundamental disagreements about authority, expertise, and Madison's best interests couldn't be resolved through further discussion. Victoria's final directive was clear and unambiguous. Mark was to have no personal interactions with Madison beyond what was absolutely required for his maintenance duties. Violation of this boundary would result in immediate termination, ending both his employment and his presence in Madison's environment. Mark accepted these terms while privately questioning whether institutional rules always served the people they were designed to protect. The resolution felt unsatisfying to everyone involved, creating artificial distance between people who had developed genuine care for each other while failing to address the underlying needs that had made their relationship valuable in the first place. The months that followed tested all three participants as they navigated the consequences of prioritizing institutional authority over personal connection. Madison's behavior continued to reflect the confusion and loss she experienced when meaningful relationships were severed without adequate explanation or alternative support. Victoria struggled with managing her daughter's increased emotional volatility while maintaining the demanding schedule that corporate leadership required. Mark continued his work with professional competence while carrying concern for a child whose well-being had become important to him, despite administrative barriers to continued involvement. The artificial boundaries created by corporate policy and parental authority ultimately proved insufficient to address the human needs that had brought them together, setting the stage for future interactions that would test everyone's commitment to rules that seemed increasingly disconnected from actual outcomes. The crisis that would force reconsideration of their carefully maintained boundaries began on a Thursday afternoon when Madison's emotional dysregulation escalated beyond what standard interventions could address effectively. The child's distress had been building throughout the week as accumulated frustrations about social conflicts, academic pressure, and family tensions reached a breaking point that overwhelmed her developing coping mechanisms. When the explosion occurred during supervised activities in the corporate childcare center, it involved physical aggression toward staff and destruction of property that created safety concerns, requiring immediate intervention. Mark heard the commotion from 2 floors away, the sound of Madison's anguish screaming cutting through the ambient noise of routine building operations with unmistakable urgency. His first instinct was to respond despite the prohibition against involvement, but awareness of potential consequences made him hesitate long enough for security personnel to reach the scene first. Yet when traditional de-escalation techniques failed to calm Madison's escalating panic, and when he realized that no one present seemed to understand the specific triggers that had precipitated her breakdown, Mark made a choice that prioritized the child's immediate welfare over his own employment security. He appeared in the doorway of the childcare center, as Madison thrashed against the gentle restraints that staff members were using to prevent her from injuring herself or others. Her face was red with exertion and tears, her voice hoarse from screaming, her entire body conveying the kind of desperate overwhelm that could traumatize both child and observers if not addressed with appropriate skill and patience. The staff members looked up with relief when they recognized him, several having witnessed his previous success in calming Madison during difficult moments. "Thank goodness you're here," one of them said. "We can't reach her mother, and she's been like this for 20 minutes. Nothing we've tried has helped." Mark assessed the situation quickly, recognizing signs of sensory overload and emotional flooding that required specific intervention strategies rather than standard behavioral management techniques. He approached slowly, speaking in the calm, steady voice that Madison had learned to associate with safety and understanding. "Hey, Madison, I can see you're having really big feelings right now. It looks scary and overwhelming." His acknowledgement of her emotional state without judgment or attempts at immediate control began creating space for her to hear external input. The de-escalation process took nearly an hour, during which Mark used techniques he had learned through helping Emma navigate similar emotional storms combined with strategies he had developed specifically for Madison's particular triggers and needs. He validated her feelings while helping her regain control through breathing exercises, sensory grounding techniques, and patient reassurance that the crisis would pass without lasting consequences. Gradually, Madison's screaming subsided into exhausted sobbing, then quiet sniffling, and finally the kind of depleted calm that follows intense emotional release. Victoria arrived as Madison was settling into peaceful exhaustion in Mark's presence, her daughter's small hand clutching his sleeve while she dozed in the aftermath of emotional overwhelm. The scene struck Victoria with complex emotions that combined gratitude for his intervention, with renewed concern about Madison's dependence on someone whose role in their lives remained fundamentally inappropriate. Yet she couldn't deny the evidence before her: staff members who had been unable to help Madison for over an hour, and a janitor who had restored calm through methods that seemed both gentle and effective. "Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, aware that Madison was still fragile from her recent crisis, "thank you for helping. Could we speak privately once Madison is settled?" Her tone was carefully neutral, avoiding both praise and criticism while acknowledging the complexity of their situation. The conversation that followed occurred in Victoria's office after Madison had been transferred to the care of her regular nanny, who arrived with apologies for delayed response to emergency calls. This setting emphasized the professional hierarchy that defined their relationship, though recent events had complicated the dynamics in ways that formal authority couldn't easily address. Victoria found herself confronting the gap between theoretical expertise and practical results, between institutional policies and individual needs that didn't conform to standard procedures. "Mr. Thompson, what you did today was remarkable," she began, her voice carrying genuine appreciation alongside continued uncertainty about appropriate boundaries. Madison's therapeutic team has been working with her for months on emotional regulation strategies, but they've never been able to calm her during a crisis like that. Her acknowledgement of his effectiveness was both gracious and puzzling, recognizing success while questioning its source. Mark responded with characteristic humility, while gently advocating for approaches that prioritize relationship over technique. Madison responds well to feeling heard and understood rather than managed or corrected. When she's overwhelmed, she needs someone to acknowledge how hard things feel before she can access the skills she's been learning. His explanation emphasized connection over intervention, suggesting that therapeutic relationships might be more important than specific methodologies in addressing childhood emotional challenges. Victoria wrestled with implications that challenged her assumptions about professional expertise and credentialed authority. "But you're not a trained therapist, Mr. Thompson. How do you know what Madison needs in these situations?" Her question was genuinely curious rather than dismissive, reflecting real interest in understanding his approach rather than simply defending institutional hierarchies. The answer Mark provided revealed the depth of his understanding about childhood trauma and emotional development, knowledge gained through personal experience rather than formal education, but no less valuable for its unconventional source. My daughter Emma went through similar struggles after her mother died. We worked with excellent therapists who taught us strategies for emotional regulation and crisis intervention. But the most important thing I learned was that kids need to feel safe and understood before they can use the tools they've been given. Victoria found herself reconsidering fundamental assumptions about expertise, authority, and the sources of knowledge that served children's actual needs. The conversation continued with increasing openness as both adults shared perspectives shaped by their different relationships with Madison and their various experiences with childhood emotional development. Victoria described the frustration of watching her daughter struggle, despite access to the best professional resources money could provide, while Mark offered insights about the importance of consistent emotional availability that transcended formal therapeutic interventions. The truth is, Victoria admitted with unusual vulnerability, I don't know how to help Madison when she gets like that. The experts give me strategies and techniques, but when she's actually in crisis, nothing seems to work. Watching you calm her down in an hour, when trained professionals couldn't do it in months, makes me question everything I thought I knew about what she needs. Mark's response was gentle but honest, acknowledging her difficulty while offering perspective that came from similar struggles in his own parenting experience. Madison is lucky to have a mother who wants to provide the best possible support, even when that means questioning your own approaches. But sometimes the most helpful thing we can offer kids is simply being present with them during difficult emotions, without trying to fix or change anything immediately. The insight resonated with Victoria's growing recognition that her instinct to solve problems through resources and expertise might not address the relational needs that seemed most important for Madison's emotional development. Their discussion evolved into collaboration as they explored ways to support Madison that honored both Victoria's parental authority and Mark's demonstrated effectiveness in helping her daughter navigate emotional challenges. The solution they developed involved formal recognition of Mark's role as an emotional support person for Madison, with appropriate supervision and documentation that satisfied institutional requirements while preserving the relationship that had proven beneficial for everyone involved. Victoria's willingness to challenge corporate policies and professional hierarchies in service of her daughter's needs represented significant personal growth, while Mark's commitment to working within appropriate boundaries demonstrated respect for family autonomy that strengthened rather than threatened their collaboration. The arrangement that emerged from their crisis-driven conversation created new possibilities for all three participants, establishing Madison's emotional well-being as the priority around which other considerations could be organized. The weeks that followed their collaborative agreement brought changes that surprised everyone involved with their positive implications for family dynamics, workplace relationships, and childhood emotional development. Madison's behavior showed steady improvement as she gained confidence in having consistent emotional support that didn't depend on perfect performance or compliance with adult expectations. Her academic progress accelerated when learning occurred in an environment that prioritized curiosity and effort over flawless execution. Social relationships became easier as she developed empathy and patience through experiencing those qualities from adults who modeled them consistently. Victoria discovered that sharing responsibility for Madison's emotional support actually enhanced rather than threatened their mother-daughter relationship, creating space for interactions based on mutual enjoyment rather than constant behavioral management. Her work performance improved as reduced stress about Madison's school difficulties allowed greater focus on professional responsibilities that had suffered during months of crisis intervention. The unexpected collaboration with Mark offered insights about leadership and relationship building that proved valuable in corporate contexts as well as family dynamics. Mark found his role expanded beyond maintenance duties to include informal consultation about workplace policies affecting employee families, his perspective valued as someone who understood both service work realities and family challenges that cross socioeconomic boundaries. The recognition of his contributions to Madison's development opened doors to additional responsibilities that utilized his interpersonal skills alongside his technical competencies. His own confidence grew as he realized that wisdom gained through personal experience could complement formal expertise in ways that served everyone more effectively. The transformation that began with a 7-year-old's behavioral crisis evolved into institutional changes that affected multiple families, demonstrating how individual relationships could catalyze broader cultural shifts toward recognizing diverse sources of knowledge and support. Victoria's willingness to challenge assumptions about authority and expertise influenced other executives to reconsider policies that separated work and family concerns artificially. The corporate childcare center implemented new approaches that emphasized emotional support alongside educational programming, creating environments where children's full developmental needs received attention. The story that had begun with conflict between parental authority and unofficial support became a model for collaboration that honored both professional boundaries and human relationships that transcended conventional hierarchies. Mark's influence on Madison continued to strengthen as their relationship was legitimized through formal recognition and appropriate supervision, creating stability that allowed both participants